Mena business owners, exchanging money for protection or their agreement to look the other way. None are interested in rocking the boat.
It is conservatively estimated that at the height of Barry Seal's operation in the mid-'80s, planes were flying into Mena and other locations in the U.S. at the rate of 4 to 5 times a week. The cargo ranged from 300 kilos to 1,500 kilos a flight. And the street value of this deadly daily load would easily be worth $15 to $75 million. Marijuana, cocaine, and heroin were all freely smuggled in.
The stalled and mishandled investigations into Kevin's and Don's death reach a dead end. Even the nationwide coverage of network television series like Unsolved Mysteries and interest from 60 Minutes can't crack the shell of cover-up encircling the case. Rumors abound, but solutions are not at hand. Nearly 2.5 years after the train deaths, a federally mandated drug task force is established throughout Arkansas. A feisty prosecutor, Gene Duffy, is assigned to run the 7th Task Force.
I established a drug task force, and set it up, hired undercover officers, learned what I could to help the district get on its feet with investigation of drug activities in the district.
Instantly, one of her investigators reveals that the now infamous train deaths may be tied to a major drug smuggling ring operating out of Mena.
There were people who had been turning up dead who were possible witnesses in the train deaths case. I respected my undercover officer's instincts about the case, and I certainly gave him permission to go forward with an investigation. He said that there were drug drops coming from airplanes in that area, in the exact vicinity where Kevin and Don had been murdered. And these drug drops from airplanes had virtually not been investigated by any of the law enforcement agencies in our district.
Further investigation reveals numerous complaints by residents, informing police of low-altitude flybys occurring late at night.
Saline County Sheriff officer would go out, take the statement from the witness, and then file the report. And there was actually no investigation. Now, these reports were there when Kevin and Don were murdered.
If the police are taking payoffs, Duffy knows that her team must gather evidence from the streets first.
I hired 7 undercover officers whose job it was to initially make street buys, work their way up the ladder into the suppliers eventually, and of course that's who we were after. And the connections that we made almost immediately led to several public officials. And the person whose name came up immediately and most frequently was Dan Harmon. We also developed an informant who was a confessed drug smuggler who told us that she had actually picked up a package of cocaine from that vicinity. She also had testified before the federal grand jury that she and Dan Harmon were lovers, but he was married at the time.
When Harmon, now newly elected county prosecutor, becomes aware of her investigation, the local press starts receiving false leaks discrediting Duffy and her task force.
The people who were immediately launched a campaign to discredit me and disband my task force was led by Dan Harmon. And of course it became apparent almost immediately that Dan Harmon was a key player in the drug smuggling, drug trafficking activity.
As county prosecutor, it is easy for Dan Harmon to file trumped-up charges against Gene Duffy.
My drug task force was shut down cold because we were getting too close. We were shut down actually before we could even get into our investigation, to the point where we had something significant to take to the grand jury in the way of asking for indictments.
Harmon succeeds in getting Duffy fired, after which he pursues her with a vengeance.
I didn't understand why 2 felony warrants were issued for my arrest when the warrants were illegal, because there was no felony charge. I knew there had to be some very powerful players behind what was happening.
In an unexpected twist, Harmon himself falls into trouble with the law.
Harmon was released from federal custody yesterday while he awaits his trial. You may remember just last Thursday, Harmon was jailed after refusing to take drug tests. Harmon maintains his innocence and says he's a victim of government harassment.
If they can stick some garbage like this on me, then every American better be scared to death.
Why should every American be scared to death? Was Harmon involved in a much larger illegal operation? Additional details of the Barry Seal story may help provide insights into the substance and magnitude of Harmon's statements. Although he has been in and out of jail and is constantly fighting the law, by 1985, Barry Seal is making so much money working with Pablo Escobar, Carlos Lader, and the Medellin cartel that his daily deposits into his bank are often more than $50,000. Some officials estimate that Seal's public and hidden assets are worth well over $5 billion. His most important asset, however, seems to rest in his uncanny ability to work within the margins of law enforcement. Louis Unglesby, then a young Baton Rouge attorney, represents Seal in his various entanglements with the law.
The documented evidence is that while Barry may have done some bad things, which I don't know that he ever did, but he certainly was being chased for them and convicted of at least 2 different events. When he got out of jail, he did a lot of things that the government couldn't do. And he brought into justice a lot of extremely bad people, very dangerous people, and very, very, very serious worldwide criminals.
Meanwhile, the Reagan administration is having difficulty convincing the American people and Congress to fund the Contra Army and their counterinsurgencies against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua.
The Soviets and Sandinistas must not be permitted to crush freedom in Central America and threaten our own security on our own doorstep. Now the Congress must decide where it stands. So tonight, I ask you to do what you've done so often in the past. Get in touch with your representative and senators and urge them to vote yes. Tell them to help the freedom fighters. Help us prevent a communist takeover of Central America.
Reagan's anti-communist fervor proves useful to Barry Seal because later that year, Barry's luck runs out. After several brushes with the law, he is busted for trying to fence $200,000 worth of Quaaludes in Fort Lauderdale. Released on bail and facing a 10-year federal sentence, Seal flies to Washington, D.C. and boasts to officials at the Drug Enforcement Agency that he can implicate the Nicaraguan Sandinistas in a cocaine smuggling operation. This meets with strong interest from representatives of the George Bush Drug Task Force and Reagan's point men in covert operations at the National Security Agency, Admiral Poindexter and his top aide, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Just weeks away